Well, good afternoon. Thanks so much for coming to be with us today. I'm San Francisco Assessor Recorder Phil Ting, and we are here to announce in conjunction with Equitas the first audit of foreclosure records in the state of California. What we started with was we've been obviously facing this foreclosure crisis for a number of years. And little by little, we had taxpayers come in who were either refinancing or they were facing foreclosures, and they wanted our assistance looking at their documents in our county land records. And historically, the process we have in California is called what's called a non-judicial foreclosure process, which means you don't have to go to court if you don't want to. And what it was developed was quite a while ago, before securities, before mortgage-backed securities, before Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. So it's a fairly antiquated system, which clearly has not kept up with the industry and all the changes in the industry. And I think what this report shows is that the system is completely broken. The system's broken for us as county recorders. The system's broken for the mortgage industry. The system is broken for consumers. Because clearly we have plenty of laws on the books, but they clearly are not being followed. We reviewed, or Equitas reviewed, and I'm here joined by Mark Rappaport and Lou Pesante from Equitas. And you can see, based on this chart, we reviewed about 382 records, and 84% of those records showed at least one clear violation of the law. And we say clear violation, we'll kind of walk you through what that means. Another additional percentage, taking it to 99%, including things that aren't violations but are called suspicious activities. And suspicious activities are things like backdating documents. So it may not be a violation of the law, but it's very odd when you submit documents that are backdated 2 years prior. And they're submitted on behalf of organizations that no longer exist. So they're submitted on behalf of an organization that's already bankrupt and has already closed up shop, but 2 years later, someone's submitting it on their behalf. So almost every single document that we reviewed of the 2,405 foreclosures between January 2009 and November of 2012 showed that. So again, it's a sample of 382 documents that we reviewed between January 2009 and October 2011, and that was of that total was 2,405 foreclosure sales. The main challenge I think that we face is we want to ensure as recorders that we have a clear and transparent title process. And I think that we owe that not just to the taxpayers and all the property owners in San Francisco, but we really owe that to the entire state, because state law governs everything that we do. And I think it's so important in a state that has a non-judicial foreclosure process that the law's completely followed. Because the reason other states have been able to pick up on these items much faster is because people have to go in front of judges. And the judges clearly understand what the laws are, and they've shown a much less tolerance for people not following the law than here in California. So let me just give you a few examples. So for an issue of assignments. So we have an issue of assignments, and it says that about 75% of the assignments that we looked at showed issues. Now, for one example, we have this category called self-assignments of the deed of trust. 27% of the deeds of trust were self-assigned. So what that means is it's as if the lender of record is not assigning it to a new lender. It's the new lender assigning that document to him or herself. So it'd be like me taking your home, but me just assigning it to myself without your authority. So it seems very odd that 27% of the time that occurred. So obviously that is what we would call highly problematic, and actually it is a violation of the law. 85% of the time there was a substitution of trustee, which is the trustee who filed the notice of default was not the same trustee named on the deed of trust. So that means that the actual trustee who's in charge of almost being an independent third party to foreclose on somebody wasn't actually the trustee of record. So it's this other party who had on record, absolutely no connection to the process, is somehow taking this property away. And we have documents that if you're buying a foreclosed sale, and we're happy to show this with you, basically we have institutions that are basically saying, hey, you're buying this, but if for whatever reason we don't own this property, well, all you get back is your deposit. We don't really, we're not saying that we own this property either, but we're just selling it to you. So I think that is highly problematic. That's 85% of the time, and that was on page 9 of the report. To give you an idea of suspicious activity, what we call is the false claims of beneficiary status. What we do is we have that the entity claiming to be the beneficiary of the deed of trust, the trustee of deed of sale, is not actually the current beneficiary on file when the property is sold at the auction. So again, what it's saying is that you actually have a party that is selling a home at an auction that, according to our land records, has no connection to it. So again, you may ask yourself, which is what I ask myself as we're kind of walking through this report, and that happened about 45% of the time. How does this happen? Well, clearly the way it happens is because there is absolutely no oversight. There is a process that is pretty strict in terms of what the law says, and there's a complete lack of oversight. And the only oversight that could happen is if I, as a consumer who was foreclosed on, would actually bring this to a court of law, and the court of law would actually have to enforce this process. So again, I think what we're not saying is, we're not saying that contracts weren't broken in terms of whether people were able to pay or not pay their loan. We're not saying whether or not anybody individually or parties as a whole were bad actors. I think what we're saying is, on the whole, as we've seen, California has bore the brunt of this foreclosure crisis. And what we are seeing is that this whole process of the way we are foreclosing property, taking property from the county land records, from the mortgage industry side, from the consumer side, is absolutely 100% broken. And I don't think it's working for any of us at this point. We obviously know that there was a recent settlement from the attorneys generals of 49 states across the country. And obviously, we think it did a good job of getting retribution back for homeowners who were perhaps victims of this process. Obviously, no settlement can be able to encompass everything, which is absolutely just impossible. What the settlement didn't do was actually look at, in the future, what should this foreclosure process look like in the state of California? And I think what we have for the first time is actually hard data. What we had in the past was anecdotal evidence. We had a homeowner here, a homeowner there, institution here, a subprime lender there. What we have for the first time is actually a statistical analysis of records in our county that point out to the level that the law has been followed or not in a variety of tests. And I think what we hope is that this report will be used by policymakers, by people in Sacramento, by the Attorney General, by our district attorney, by our city attorney, to be looking at future action, as well as the industry, to be looking at what this process should look like further. What I'm going to do is now ask Lou Pizzanti to come forward and just kind of walk through some of the significant findings of the report, and then we're happy to take questions.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Oh, and this, by the way, are all the documents that we reviewed, right? These are documents.
That's a sample of some of the, that's a very small sample. That's five cases about or something, I'm not sure, but.
So just give you an idea of what the documents are.
And then from this, we produced about 4,000 pages of analysis that we condensed into this 20-page report that we're releasing today. So good afternoon.
What's your name?
Oh, Lou Pizzanti, Pizzante.
And your organization?
I'm a partner at Equitas.
Spelling your first name?
Lou, L-O-U. And my name's on the back of the report, actually, as well.
And we have copies of the report for anybody who's interested over here.
Right. So, as Phil was saying, there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence about foreclosure irregularities in California. Where there's smoke, you naturally expect to find fire. What this report uncovers, though, surprisingly, was an utter inferno. What we did is we looked at about 16% of the foreclosure sales over a 3-year period, and we focused on 6 areas And we actually have that. I don't know if we can put that chart up too. But what we did is we looked at documents that were recorded at the county recorder's office, and we also looked at federal filings, public information and federal filings, such as SEC filings in connection with securitizations. The report explains, the first page has an introduction that just gives some summary statistics, and then we go into each of these areas, and we talk about the topics that we looked within each of these areas and explain those topics with the exception rates that we found, the issues that we found. So we look generally at things like assignments. Loans are in today's modern mortgage market, they're not portfolioed. They're sold to various parties, and most of them are ultimately securitized. They're sold to a securitization trust. Every time there's a sale, the seller assigns to the buyer. There's an assignment, a document. So we looked at issues relating to that assignment. We looked at notice of default, the timing requirements and disclosure requirements that must be given to the borrower. We looked at substitutions. When a foreclosure is initiated, generally in California there's a trustee. We have a deed trust state, and the trustee oversees the foreclosure process. When the foreclosure is initiated, there's a substitution generally of the original trustee to a firm that specializes in foreclosure default services and foreclosure processing. There's regulations around that because only one entity can be in charge of that process. We looked at the notices of trustee sale, the notice that has to happen. We looked at timing and notice requirements before a trust sale, a foreclosure sale happens. And then we looked at suspicious activity, as Phil mentioned, which has to do with things like robo-signing, backdating, suspicious signatures, those sorts of things. And finally, we looked at MERS, which is the electronic registry that is maintained by the mortgage industry that tracks the ownership of loans. And we compared their chain of title and their registry to what is recorded in the county records, but to see if there were conflicts. And we actually found a significant number of conflicts there. I think 58%. And so, 58%. So all of those, within the report, we go into each of these and talk about what it is that we are looking at. We try to explain it in plain English and show you what the various exception rates were for the different things within each of those subject areas. Now, I can tell you this, that not only did we find issues in 99% of the loans, irregularities in 99% of the loans, we found in 84% of them what appear to be clear violations of law. But it wasn't just that we found one issue in 99% of the loans. In 2/3 of the loans had 4 or more issues. So they failed 4 things. They had 4 irregularities or 4 violations of law or more. And more than 75% of the loans had violations within 3 or more of these subject areas. So it's not that we found, which is that chart, yeah. So it's not that we found, these loans didn't have one thing wrong with them. These loans had many things wrong with them across different subject areas, across different parts of the foreclosure process. And so that goes further to substantiate, the conclusion that we made, which is just that the foreclosure process in California, which is based on laws, some of them dating back over 100 years, no longer adequately reflects or regulates the current mortgage market. These laws were promulgated before there were things like securitization and real estate capital markets. We're not here to indict the mortgage industry or to say that all people who lost their home did not deserve to lose their home. Certainly there was reckless borrowing, and there were good actors within the mortgage industry that have just been caught up in a situation where the boom in production in originations could not withstand the ultimate pressure on the servicing system and on the foreclosure system in California once the boom turned to a slump.
Great, thank you, Lou. So I know we have a lot of information and a lot of data. It's a lot to digest. It actually has taken me quite a while, but I'm happy to open up to questions and try to, yes.
Your sense is that this data and the study is representative of California. Does the economy in San Francisco, the cost of properties in San Francisco, is that a factor as well too? Would that still mean that this would be representative of the state as a whole?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think this is representative because what we're looking at is the process of foreclosure. We are actually having fewer foreclosures in San Francisco than Riverside, San Bernardino, Sacramento, Stockton, like you pointed out. You can see what we did is we did oversample based on the chart. The red and the yellow are the higher propensity foreclosure areas, so we did oversample in those areas to take a look at that. But I believe that these are actors who not only act locally, but nationally. And what we've seen is nationally there have been studies in Essex County, Massachusetts, in North Carolina, where similar trends have happened. And what we're seeing is literally the industry not following the various laws, whether it's state law or county laws or local laws in place across the board on this in this foreclosure process. And what you see is people saying they represent an agency that they don't represent and they work for some other agency. Like I said, one of the many examples is, if I were acting on behalf of the new lender, but I said I was working for the old lender who is now bankrupt and basically saying the old lender is signing the property over to me. That just wouldn't happen. Just like if I asked for your home, that would be illegal.
Is the sheer volume of foreclosures a factor in this? Is the whole thing overwhelming the system?
It might be. That might be one of the major reasons. I don't think that the system was prepared for this level of volume. I think that what we're seeing across the country in terms of real estate is not a cyclical bust. There's ups and downs, just like in any economic situation. This is a huge correction. This is a industry correction. This is just not a cyclical, regular economic correction. Just to give you an example in San Francisco, to give you some numbers. During the dot-com bust, we had at the peak about 2,400 people applying for assessment appeals, which is assessment reductions. 2 years ago, we had 6,600 people file. 6,600. We're doing about 4 times as many reductions that we did during that last economic correction during the dot-com bust. So you had a follow-up question?
Actually, just about the irregularities you found. It sounds like you found things that might be prosecutable, actually, in terms of some of this being crimes that legal agencies could follow up on.
We're not. I'm not a lawyer, but clearly what we see is we see across the board laws that were not followed, and I think it's going to have to be up to our local DAs, up to the AG to take a look at whether or not this is in their mind prosecutable.
This doesn't invalidate any of the sales. I guess I want to ask a so what question. Why does this matter if you can't invalidate the sale and say basically this transaction was not legal, and so...
No, I think that is what we're saying, Barbara. So these transactions, based on many of the laws that were not followed, are absolutely not legal.
Still, there's nothing that can really be done about it. If your office can't write a letter to whoever and say, your title information that you filed was incorrect, that sale is not valid, and therefore you don't own this property.
Absolutely. So what we can't do is, for people 2 years ago who lost their homes, who may have moved now and no longer in San Francisco, we may not be able to help. But I think who we are going to be able to help are people who currently own property in San Francisco, people who are trying to get loan modifications, people who might be in the middle of this foreclosure process. And I think what this points out is that for the first time there is evidence, real data to demonstrate how broken the system is. And I think we really need Sacramento, our legislature, our governor, as well as many of the legal entities to really take a hard look at what this information says, to look at what some next steps are. There's no question there needs to be a organizational restructuring of this industry because, again, it's not working for everybody, whether there's prosecution.
Your office is going to do when people come in the future and file these papers? Are you going to be able to be looking for certain things and then telling the people that are involved that this isn't correct and it can't be filed?
We actually had legislation that we sponsored last year with Assembly Member Bob Wieckowski, and Senator Mark DeSaulnier is going to be carrying it. And what it does is to solve many of these issues, which is saying that we need to record all these various documents at the right time during the foreclosure process. So it doesn't mean that every single loan needs to do this. So for the loans that aren't facing problems, we're not going to force the industry to do it, but we're saying, hey, if you're going to actually foreclose on people, you better be able to plug in all these gaps and to do it at that appropriate time. And we're actually in conversations with the industry to try to figure out how we can actually do that so it doesn't, again, skyrocket costs for lending, because I don't think we want that for homeowners, but also so that we can do it so that county recorders don't have to play detectives in how to sniff out this stuff. So I think those are very, very tangible things. There'll also be other legislation that we'll be taking a look at, whether we co-sponsor or not in Sacramento, to actually see if it will address many of these other issues. So there are absolutely prospective things that we can do. I think Lou wants
to speak to that. I mean, certainly some of these violations result in foreclosure sales that may be voidable, but I think the real purpose of this was to try to quantify the nature and frequency of issues in California and San Francisco in particular, and with the objective of improving and helping to stabilize the real estate market. I think that fundamental to all this is the notion that clear chain of title and the integrity of the public records is essential for a stable housing market. And until we correct that, we have no way of ensuring that this type of crisis does not happen again in the future. So, there are other agencies like the AG's office and the city attorneys that are going to look at this from a prosecutorial standpoint. But our viewpoint, I think, and Phil's viewpoint really is looking at this from a policy standpoint to stop something like this from happening again and to modernize California's real estate laws to ensure that.
So, I mean, let's say can somebody come here to your office and say, I went through a foreclosure and I understand that there's paperwork. Can I get that paperwork, hire a lawyer, and do I have a claim?
Absolutely, and I think that's how much of this started, because, for example, people would come in and they would try to, even before they were facing foreclosure, they would just refi, and they couldn't find their original lender, or they couldn't find the new lender. They didn't know who actually owned the loan, and they asked for our help, just saying, hey, can you just print out all the documents on our property? And we would do that, and there are many gaps. People facing foreclosures, the same thing. So if anybody wanted to, they're absolutely welcome to, they can go through their records, and we're happy to walk them through that, and they could do that with an attorney present and with the help, and then they can decide whether or not what other for future action to do. But I think, while I feel bad for the folks who may have been facing invalid foreclosures, I think given Barbara's question, it's really looking forward, because we know that we have hundreds of thousands of homeowners in San Francisco today, not just, and then millions of homeowners in California. And moving forward, I think we need to make sure that the process is a fair, clear, and transparent process for them in the future. And right now, this report clearly demonstrates that it's not.
So actually, I just wondering, during your research, do you see that this violation is done by the bank or maybe private finance agency or otherwise? What kind of things? What kind of agency?
We see violations by multiple parties. There's multiple parties in the value chain of the mortgage business today. And so certainly we saw issues by purported beneficial interest holders, in other words, entities that had purportedly purchased the loan and owned title to the loan. And in many cases they do, but they were just unable to document. We also saw irregularities by the servicers and the trustees, the entities that specialize in default services and foreclosure. That's when you see things around the substitution issue. What happened was, and this goes back to a question that was asked earlier, I think you asked earlier about, is this just a matter of the volume of foreclosures? It's also a matter of the volume of originations. The production machine was running at 125% capacity, and the industry was originating lots of loans, but they were having some problems documenting those loans and archiving those documents. And so when things turn bad and you have to kind of, recreate that chain of title, and you have to look at the documentation around assignments and who owned the loans and stuff like that, some of those documents were missing or they were never prepared. Doesn't mean that the sale didn't really happen, but there's no evidence of it. And that's where you get things like backdating and robo-signing and stuff like
Are
that.
we talking about a legal, like criminal type problem, or are we talking about a paperwork problem that's just overflowing and everything?
Well, I can tell you that sometimes there's no distinction. I mean, if you have intent to compromise the integrity of the public record system, that's a criminal.
Is there an intent thing here, or is it that people are drowning in their sea of paperwork and aren't keeping up with this?
I think that's an excellent question, and that's that kind of question that I asked Equitas as we were sort of going through this. Are these sort of minor violations? Is this kind of what I call is this sort of jaywalking, or is this something much more serious? And I think what you see is a series of violations where parties are pretending to be parties that they are not. I gave you that early example. It'd be as if I signed your home over to myself using my signature, pretending to be you. And we saw that over and over again where we had parties representing entities that they had no affiliation with. They actually were working for the entity receiving the loan or the property and acting on that really across the board. I'll let you use your judgment to determine the severity of that. But many of these actions, if not all these actions, render many of these foreclosures invalid. And I think, again, we're not saying whether or not the basic contract was followed. The basic contract is someone borrowed money, someone had to pay back money. That is obviously, we were not privy to that information. We don't know that. But what we do know is along the way of somebody losing their home, that clearly a number of parties acted illegally, and they acted across the board. It wasn't, I think if we had a report that said this happened, 5% or 10% of the time, I mean, we're basically saying that almost for every instance, something along the way was done incorrectly.
Phil, is this something that is unique to foreclosures, or if you went back and just looked at titles and sales in general, or would you likely find the same kind of thing?
No, I think you probably would find similar kinds of things, but they become less of an issue because, when you're borrowing money and then you're paying that loan off and everything is fine, there's not really this issue. The issue comes up when people are trying to do something, whether it's a refinance or when there's a foreclosure. So that's what I'm saying. It's not just endemic to the foreclosure process. I think this is a problem with the industry and how we're borrowing money, how it's being recorded, and how the industry is processing all that information. And I think given Lou's point is, we have a system that was created back when you used to walk to the street corner, you found your lender, you signed a note, the lender, it was the lender's money, the lender held that note, and when you paid off your mortgage, the lender basically was made whole. Now you have a system where you walk in, you don't even walk into a bank, you do it online, you do it with some bank, could be anywhere in the country. They may actually keep it, or most oftentimes they're selling it, and they're selling it as a huge part of a portfolio of an income stream to promise to investors, just like you would promise a bond. And they were packaged in a certain way that were obviously problematic because that's been well documented. And then they are sold and promised, and then these investors who are buying them, many include large pension funds, large investors across the country, many sophisticated buyers who aren't getting the money back, and then you start to see this whole sort of crumbling effect. And the biggest problem has been the huge amount of wealth that all of us have lost as a country, individual homeowners and sort of investors across the board.
Okay, we have time for just one more question.
Proposing, I mean, you're kind of vaguely talking about legislating something, right?
So our legislation, again, one of the major issues with this is that you see issues around backdating. You see issues around parties pretending to be other parties. Now, that really wouldn't happen if, every party along the way, especially to the foreclosure process, were asked to record the documents when they're supposed to record them at the time that they're supposed to do it. And we have legislation that is working toward that goal. And we are sitting down, again, with the industry to try to find a way to do it so that it doesn't make it more expensive, doesn't make it that it's, adding a whole amount of time to the process. There's also be numerous other pieces of legislation going through Sacramento, which we'll be reviewing to see if it helps, again, solve many of the issues that we addressed. We are giving a copy of this report to the Attorney General because there, again, off the settlement was immunity from many of these issues. So they're going to make a determination whether or not they want to pursue this, as well as perhaps our district attorney and our city attorney. Yeah.
How did you pick the ones to review? Was it just random, or were these people who had complained?
No, it was intended to, it was a representative sample. You can look at the foreclosure map there. There were areas of concentration where there's greater foreclosures. Those would be proportionally represented within the sample, but it was across income type, it was across loan product type, so it's a representative sample of foreclosure in San Francisco. It wasn't initiated by the homeowners.
You just randomly pulled out which ones you wanted to look at?
Yes, it was a blind study. But making sure.
In fact, we had no process in selecting, so the only selection that we did is we selected Equitas, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about Equitas and what you do.
Yeah, what Equitas does is Equitas provides audit services and investigative services and regulatory compliance, consulting and litigation support all around mortgages, from originations to servicing through foreclosure. So we're pretty experienced in this sort of stuff. We do it nationally.
I had a question. This is Dairo Romero from MEDA, one of the organizations that help homeowners to modify their loans and prevent foreclosure. And we know for the fact that I just want to ask to confirm if there is a targeted population that has been affected, or more of the violation happen with that. I'm talking about minorities, people of color, English as a second language. And the other thing is those clients that they have the arguments to go to the court, they don't have the resources and the necessary, and I really value the work that the office is doing to that on the public, is the necessary is trying to give some resources for those families to advocate and fight in the court for this violation, because there is a settlement, but this is not enough for all the wealth that those communities are losing right now.
Well, I think that was the biggest challenges. So as a recorder for the county, we're charged with maintaining the records. Many people will record all sorts of documents, and we cannot determine the legal validity for everything that is recorded. But I think we were very concerned as we saw more and more instances of gaps and invalid conduct that was going on, that we decided to take a much closer look at this issue. And you can see what Lou mentioned is he pulled, so the red is the deepest foreclosure area. So obviously that's where the most number of documents were. The yellow focuses on the next highest percentage, so that's where the next one would be, the next sample would be, and the green is much lighter. So what they did is they pulled a representative sample based on geographically where the foreclosures were occurring, but it was absolutely a blind sample. But again, you could see the neighborhood that was hit the hardest was the south and southeast part of town, which is very diverse, probably the lowest to moderate income area of San Francisco. But again, a high propensity of homeowners, as well as this Tenderloin Civic Center area as well. Those are the highest areas that were hit.
I'm sorry, I think this is basically, I know, so we have time for right now. We have some.
Let me just take my question and we'll go.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
I just would like some, it sounds almost as though you want to get the legislature to pass some laws to make people follow laws that they haven't been following. And I just wonder, A, what you're going to accomplish, because then there's just a new law for people to ignore. And then secondly, aside from all the technicals, are there many or any of these cases that had the laws been followed properly, the house would not have been foreclosed?
That we don't know, because we don't know, we haven't been able to personally get in touch with each of the homeowners. People haven't necessarily come forward. We're in the process of determining that. I think that'll be our next step, because we are going to be giving this information to folks like MEDA, who's MEDA is an organization. They are a HUD certified housing counselor. So we're going to give them this report. We're going to give.
passing another law?
I completely agree. I mean, I think that's what I think we're saying is the whole system is broken. So I don't think passing just a single law is really going to change the entire system. But I think what we need to do is step back and reevaluate how to completely revamp this system. Because again, these laws were passed over 100 years ago. They were passed when you didn't drive up to your bank, you walked up to your bank, or you rode your horse up to your bank. So we need to make sure that given how fast the industry is moving, given now that we're using securities and Wall Street to add more money into this industry, how we can make it work for all of us. And I think we need to step back. You're right, it's not just going to be one law, it's probably going to be many laws, but the whole industry is going to need to be revamped.
If I could do that, one thing quick to that is that we're not saying that the industry, we're not indicting an industry for systemic intentional wrongdoing. What we're saying, we're just presenting results. What we're saying maybe is that these laws, the reason why there's so many irregularities is because they just don't apply to today's market. They're the wrong laws. So if you would pass something that was more applicable and you know, helped the industry to comply, I think you would, I don't think the industry wants to break the law.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
everybody.
Yeah.